Start by getting your materials and tools together. Plans. These will be provided by gates, 8 clamps, drill and screws, nail gun and 2-inch nails, 2x4s or 2x6s cut to length, 3/4 inch forming plywood cut to width, spacing blocks cut from scrap lumber, sawhorses. Create a jig table for panel production using scrap lumber to create a flush stop with a 1.5-inch offset. Every gates column will come with detailed plans for assembly. The cover sheet of the plans will have instructions for use of all hardware and accessories on the column. Page 2 of the drawings has specific information about your column, including dimensions and clamp spacings. Let's build the first panel. Place the pre-cut plywood flush against the table jig. Place the first 2x4 flush against the offset and clamp in place. Place spacing blocks at both ends, then place the next 2x4. Continue with the remaining 2x4s, clamping the last one in place. Your 2x4s should be flush against one short end of the plywood. Designate this as the bottom. Nail the 2x4s to the panel at 6-inch intervals. The nail head should be flush with the lumber to prevent interference with clamps. Take care that the nail does not penetrate the underside of the panel to prevent concrete finish issues. Next, build a spacer jig. After nailing the 2x4s, lay a piece of scrap lumber over the spacing blocks at the bottom of the panel. Nail or staple the lumber to the spacing blocks. Set aside for use on the next panels. Now install the plastic chamfer. Flip panel, lumber side down, and attach chamfer on the 1.5-inch offset flush with the bottom of the panel. Penetrate the chamfer at the V-groove starting 2 inches from the bottom and spacing at 12-inch intervals. Make sure the last screw is placed 2 inches from the top. Now we will build panels 2 through 4. Place the panel flush against the table jig. Place the first 2x4 flush against the offset. Using the spacer jig that you built in the last step, place the remaining 2x4s. Make sure that the 2x4s are flush with the panel edge on one end, then clamp in place. Nail the 2x4s to the panel every 6 inches. Remove the jig and flip the panel over. Lay the chamfer on the 1.5-inch offset. Starting 2 inches from the top and ending 2-inched from the bottom, sink screws every 12 inches in the V-groove of the chamfer. Build 2 squaring templates. Cut a piece of plywood, matching the dimensions of the column, and shear the corners at a 45-degree angle. Center a piece of 2x4 flush to the edge of one side and attach. Repeat on the remaining sides. Now, we will build the column. Clamp the squaring template to the bottom panel. Place the side panels. Clamp in place after each panel. Take care that the chamfer and offset are in the correct place. Place the top panel and clamp in place. Start by getting your tools and materials together. 2 back angles, 1 pin angle, 1 operator angle, 2 squaring corners, or pickup loops, 6 1/2" by 1 1/2" grade 5 bolts for squaring corners, or pickup loops, 1 1/2" by 1 1/2" grade 5 bolt for hinge corner, 7 1/2" lock nuts, 3/4 inch socket, 3/4 inch wrench, impact gun, plywood blocks cut to length for your specific column. First, we will need to build a clamp jig. Use scrap lumber to create a square block that the clamps will be built around. The length of the lumber and spacing should be 4 1/2 inches greater than the finished concrete dimension when using 2x4 lumber. For example, if you are building a form for a column 16 inch by 16 inch, the blocks will be cut 20.5 inches long and be spaced 20.5 inches apart. If you are building a rectangular form with the dimensions of 20 inches by 24 inches, the blocks will be cut to 28.5 inches and spaced 24.5 inches apart. Round the corners of the blocks so the assembled clamp does not bind on the jig. Add 3-inch blocks to each end of the jig to support individual angles during assembly. Let's practice building some jigs. Looking at the dimensions of the column on the plan view of your drawings, what is the length and width of your jig? For a 16 by 16 inch column, you would cut the blocks to 20.5 inches and space them 20.5 inches apart. Now let's try a rectangular column. Looking at your drawing, what will be the length and width of your jig? For a 12 inch by 24 inch column, the blocks will be 28.5 inches long and spaced 16.5 inches apart. Now that the clamp jig is made, let's start putting together the clamps. Place your angle on the jig, using the 3-inch blocks to support the angle on the ends. Place a 1/2 inch bolt with a nut on the corner, diagonally opposite of the pin and operator. This is the hinge corner. Close the operator and push the angle against the jig to square. Install the HD squaring corner with 3 1/2-inch bolts with locking nuts. On one clamp, install pickup loops in the same manner as the squaring corners. This is the top clamp. After the corners are installed, tighten the hinge bolt, taking care to not over-tighten. The hinge corner should rotate without much resistance. Fasten the operator and check for squareness of the first few clamps assembled. Stack assembled clamps in the locked position up to 10 high. Now that the clamps are assembled, it's time to mark where they go on the column. Consult the plans before beginning to make your marks. Mark clamp spacing on both sides of the column, referring to the plans as needed. Use a T-square to extend the marks down the sides. The column is now ready for the clamps to be installed. Open clamp, align to marks, and close. Install remaining clamps on the pre-marked lines. Use a rubber mallet as needed to keep alignment. The clamps are now ready to be fastened to the form. Fasten the clamps to the panels. Check that all clamps are aligned to your marks, and the bottom of the column is still flush. Then fasten the clamps to the panels using Spax power lags. Check your drawing for fastener placement. Insert the coil rod. Connect the top 2 clamps with 2 1/2-inch high tensile coil rods and 4 nuts per rod. Your column is now ready to be transported or placed. The next video will cover bracing, scaffolding, and safety accessories. Thank you for watching Lock-Fast Column Clamp Assembly. For more information, go to gatesconcreteforms.com or send us an email at info@gatesconcreteforms.com.